Redemption is a long road, but even the darkest path is lit by the flickering neon of hope and second chances. Witness the powerful stories of rebirth and the incredible strength it takes to start over from absolutely nothing. Hit subscribe now and let the light guide you home. The morning I drove out to the farm for the last time, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at me. 64 years old, gray at the temples, lines carved deep around my eyes from decades of early mornings and hard winters. I sat there in the driveway for a long moment, engine idling, just staring at that stranger in the mirror. My wife Dorothy would have laughed at me. "Frank," she would have said, "you look distinguished. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and go do what needs to be done." So I did. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, because the ending only makes sense if you understand what that farm meant to me, what it meant to us. My grandfather built the farmhouse in 1951, the year before my father was born. He hauled the lumber himself from a mill in eastern Ohio, drove it back on a flatbed truck with two of his brothers helping him stack it. The house sits on 42 acres outside a small town called Millbrook, about an hour and 15 minutes southeast of Columbus. It is not a grand property. The barn leans a little to the left after a bad ice storm in 2009, and I never got around to fixing it properly. The kitchen is small. The ceilings in the upstairs bedrooms are low enough that tall visitors tend to duck when they come through the doorways. But the front porch wraps around two full sides of the house, and on summer evenings you can sit out there and watch the light go golden across the back field and feel, in your chest, that specific quiet that only comes from land your family has worked for generations. Dorothy and I moved in full-time after we got married in 1988. She had grown up in Cincinnati and had never lived anywhere rural before. I was a little worried, honestly. I thought maybe she'd find it lonely or dull. Instead, she planted a kitchen garden, the first spring that grew so large and wild, we were giving away tomatoes to half the county by August. She learned to drive the tractor. She adopted every stray cat that wandered up the driveway. She knew all the neighbors by name within 6 months, which was more than I could say for some families that had lived in Millbrook their whole lives. We raised our son Marcus there. He grew up running in those back fields, catching fireflies in mason jars, learning to drive on the old dirt road that circles the property. I taught him to fish in the pond at the edge of the south pasture. Dorothy taught him to bake bread on Sunday mornings. We were not a wealthy family. I worked as an electrician for 31 years, and Dorothy managed the office for a local veterinary clinic. But we owned our land outright, and we had built something that felt, to us, like abundance. Dorothy was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of 2019. She passed away 14 months later, in July of 2020, on a Thursday afternoon when the light was coming through the bedroom curtains, exactly the way she always said she loved it best. She was 58 years old. I am not going to spend a long time describing those 14 months or the year that followed, because that grief belongs to me, and I keep it private. What I will tell you is that after she was gone, the farm became the most important thing I had left. Every inch of that property held her. The garden she planted, the porch swing we bought together at an estate sale in 2003 and repainted twice, the kitchen windowsill where she kept a row of small ceramic animals that Marcus had given her over the years, starting with a chipped rabbit he brought home from a school fair when he was 7. I kept everything exactly where she had left it. Marcus was 31 when his mother died. He had been living in Cincinnati for several years at that point, working in sales for a software company. I was glad he had his own life, his own footing. Dorothy and I had always encouraged that. He came to the farm for the funeral and stayed for 2 weeks afterward, helping me sort through practical matters, sitting with me on the porch in the evenings. It was a hard time, but we got through it together. And when he left to go back to the city, I felt like we understood each other. He called me 8 months later to tell me he was getting married. Her name was Kelsey. She was 28, worked in marketing, and had grown up in a suburb of Columbus, in a neighborhood where every house looked like every other house on the street. Marcus brought her to the farm for Thanksgiving that first year, and I tried hard to make her feel welcome. I made Dorothy's recipes. I showed her around the property. I told her the history of the place, the same stories I had told Marcus 100 times when he was growing up. She was polite. I want to be fair about that. She shook my hand, said the food was delicious, complimented the view from the back porch. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at the house, a particular kind of appraisal, the way a person looks at something when they are calculating its value rather than feeling its worth. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was a grieving man who was looking too hard at everything. They got married the following June. I was there, of course. I sat in the front row and clapped and smiled, and meant it as genuinely as I could. Marcus looked happy. That mattered to me more than anything else. The trouble started quietly, the way trouble usually does. It was about 3 months after the wedding. Marcus called me on a Sunday evening, which was not unusual, and after a few minutes of small talk he mentioned, carefully, that things had been a little tight financially. The company he worked for had restructured, and his commission structure had changed. Kelsey's marketing contract had not been renewed. They were fine, he said, just a little stretched. I asked if he needed help. He said he didn't want to put me out. I said he was my son. The outcome of that conversation was that I told them they were welcome to come stay at the farm for a while, rent-free, while they got back on their feet. I want to be honest about what I was thinking at the time. Part of it was practical generosity. Part of it was something lonelier than that. The farm was too quiet. I was rattling around in that house by myself, with Dorothy's ceramic animals on the windowsill and her garden going to seed because I didn't have the heart to tend it the way she had. The thought of the house full again, of voices in the kitchen in the morning, of someone else on the property, it appealed to me more than I wanted to admit. They moved in at the end of October. The first few months were genuinely fine. Marcus helped me fix the gutter on the north side of the barn. Kelsey repainted the hallway, which I had to admit needed it. We had dinner together most evenings. It was not what it had been with Dorothy. Nothing ever would be, but it was life in the house again, and I was grateful for it. I gave them the large bedroom upstairs, the one with the east-facing windows. I moved my things into the smaller room at the end of the hall, the one that had been Marcus's when he was a boy. I did this without being asked. It seemed like the right thing to do, make the guests comfortable. I noticed, sometime around February, that I had stopped thinking of them as guests. Not because anything dramatic had happened. It was smaller than that. It was the way Kelsey started referring to the house. "We really should replace that couch," she said one evening. Not to me specifically, just out loud, as though she were making a note on a list. "The kitchen layout doesn't make any sense," she said another time. "If you took out that wall between the pantry and the back corner, you'd get so much more usable space." I didn't say anything the first few times. She was young. She meant well. People redecorate. But then she started moving things. The ceramic animals on the kitchen windowsill disappeared one afternoon while I was out checking the fence line along the south pasture. When I came in and noticed they were gone, I stood in the kitchen for a full minute before I could make myself speak. I asked Kelsey where they had gone. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop and she looked up and said, "Oh, I put them in the cabinet under the stairs. They were cluttering up the windowsill. I went and got them out of the cabinet. I put them back on the windowsill." Neither of us said anything else about it. 2 weeks later, they were gone again. That time I found them in a box in the hall closet, wrapped in newspaper, like they were being packed for a move. I unwrapped every single one of them. The chipped rabbit from the school fair, the small ceramic horse, the owl, with one eye chipped from when Marcus had dropped it at age 9, and I carried them upstairs to my bedroom and set them on the dresser where I could see them from the bed. I should have said something then. I should have sat both of them down and explained clearly what those objects meant and why the decision to move them was not Kelsey's to make. But I am of a generation that was not taught to talk about grief directly. We were taught to absorb it and keep going. I told myself it was not worth a confrontation. I told myself that a 64-year-old man getting upset about ceramic animals was embarrassing. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was staying quiet a month later when I overheard Kelsey on a phone call in the kitchen. She didn't know I had come back inside from the barn. I was standing in the mudroom pulling off my boots when I heard her voice clearly through the half-open door. "It's a good property," she was saying. "The land alone is worth something. The house needs work? Obviously, but that's fixable. I'm just saying long-term it makes sense. And he's 64. He's not going to be managing 40 acres forever." I stood there in the mudroom in my socked feet. I put my boots back on and went back outside. I did not tell Marcus what I had heard. I convinced myself I had misunderstood the context. I convinced myself that Kelsey was perhaps talking about something else, some hypothetical, some conversation about estate planning that was, if premature, not necessarily malicious. People talked about these things. It didn't mean what I was afraid it meant. Looking back, I understand that I was not naive. I was hoping. By the time they had been at the farm for 14 months, the dynamic had shifted in ways I kept struggling to name. Marcus worked from home most days now, and he was often absorbed in calls and screens, present in body, but distant in attention. Kelsey had, in his absence, become the person who made most of the daily decisions about the house. She had replaced the couch. She had taken down the curtains in the living room that Dorothy had made herself from fabric she found at a fabric fair in 2014 and replaced them with white linen panels she ordered online. When I came downstairs one Saturday morning and saw those curtains gone, I felt it physically, in my sternum, like a door closing. I said something that time. Calmly, I hope. I explained that those curtains had been handmade by Dorothy and that they were important to me. Kelsey looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as patient condescension. "Frank," she said, "I understand they had sentimental value, but the fabric was faded, and honestly the whole room needed to breathe." "Then you should have asked me," I said. "I didn't think it would be a big deal," she said. "That is not the same thing as asking," I said. The conversation ended there. Marcus had heard the last part of it from the kitchen doorway, and he came in afterward, sat with me at the table, and said quietly that he knew this was hard, that he appreciated my patience, that things were getting better financially, and they would have their own place before too long. He said it genuinely. I believe he meant it, and I believe that he was not fully seeing, or was choosing not to see, what was happening around him. The day that changed everything was a Tuesday in March. I had driven into Millbrook in the morning to pick up some supplies and have coffee with my neighbor Dale, who has the property adjacent to mine, and who I have been friends with since we were both in our 30s. I was gone for about 3 hours. When I came home, I pulled into the driveway, carried my bags inside, set them on the kitchen counter. I noticed immediately that something was different in the living room. The framed photograph that sat on the mantelpiece, the one from Dorothy's and my 25th wedding anniversary, the one where she is laughing at something off camera and her hair is down and she looks exactly the way I always want to remember her, was not there. I set down the bag I was holding. I walked to the mantelpiece and stood in front of it. The frame was there, the glass was there, but the photograph itself had been removed from the frame. The frame was propped open, empty, leaning against the wall. I found Dorothy's photograph in the kitchen trash can, folded in half. I want to stop here and ask you to understand something. I am a calm man by nature. I was raised by a calm man. I have spent 64 years practicing the discipline of not reacting immediately, of letting the first wave of feeling pass before I speak. That is the ethic I was raised with. It has served me well for most of my life. I stood in my kitchen holding that folded photograph for a very long time. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought clearly, probably more clearly than I had thought about anything in a long time, about what I was going to do. Kelsey came home from town about 20 minutes later. She came through the back door, set her keys on the counter, and then saw me sitting at the table. I had smoothed the photograph out flat on the table in front of me. I had my hands folded next to it. She looked at the photograph, then at me. "I was going to replace it," she said, "with a new frame, a better one." "That is not what I asked," I said. "The frame was dated, Frank." "Kelsey," I said, "that is a photograph of my wife." "I know who it is," she said, and something in her voice shifted then, some performance of patience dropping away. She put her purse down on the counter and turned to face me fully and said, "Frank, I want to talk to you honestly for a minute. You can't live in a museum. Dorothy has been gone for 3 years. This is our home now. We live here. We're trying to make a life here. And it is hard to do that when every single surface in this house is a shrine." I looked at her. "I hear you," I said. "Do you?" she said. "Yes," I said. "I hear exactly what you are saying." That was the entire conversation. I picked up Dorothy's photograph, went upstairs, and put it in the drawer of my nightstand where it would not be touched again. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed I had slept in for 30 years with my wife, and I did something I almost never allow myself to do. I let myself feel the full weight of what was happening, all of it. And when I was done, I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled my family's legal matters for over 15 years. She is methodical, unsentimental, and excellent at her work. I told her everything. I told her about the conversation I had overheard in the kitchen, about the curtains, about the ceramic animals, about the photograph. I told her what Kelsey had said about the house being their home now. I told her that I had made no formal arrangement with Marcus and Kelsey. No lease, no agreement, nothing in writing. That they were living on my property on an informal understanding that had gone badly sideways. Patricia listened to all of it. Then she asked me one question. "Frank," she said, "what do you want the outcome to be?" I told her, "I want to be honest about something here. The decision I made was not impulsive. It was not made in anger. I thought about it for 2 weeks before I instructed Patricia to proceed. I thought about Marcus, about his mother, about what Dorothy would have said. I thought about what it would mean for my relationship with my son going forward. I turned it over every morning on the front porch with my coffee, in the evenings watching the light go across the back field, in the small hours when I couldn't sleep. Here is what I kept coming back to. That farm was not just property. It was the accumulated effort of 4 generations of my family. My grandfather's labor, my father's labor, my own 31 years of work as an electrician, every overtime shift, every cold early morning, had gone into maintaining and preserving that land. Dorothy's love was in every corner of it. It was not a resource to be assessed. It was not a stepping stone. It was not a backdrop for someone else's life plan. And I was not finished living. That last part surprised me when I finally let myself think it clearly. 64 is not old. My father worked his own property until he was 79. I was healthy, I was capable, and somewhere under the weight of the last 3 years, under the grief and the loneliness and the desperate gratitude for any presence in that house, I had forgotten that the story of my life was not over. I had more decades ahead of me if I was lucky. I did not have to spend them shrinking. I listed the farm quietly. Patricia connected me with a real estate attorney and a listing agent who was professional and discreet. I did not tell Marcus and Kelsey. I was under no legal obligation to do so. The farm was in my name alone, had been since my father transferred the deed to me in 1996. I signed the listing agreement on a Wednesday afternoon in Patricia's office and drove home through the flat Ohio farmland with the windows down and something in my chest that felt, for the first time in a long time, like clarity. The showing period lasted 3 weeks. I arranged the showings for weekdays when both Marcus and Kelsey were typically occupied. I told no one except Patricia and my neighbor Dale, who had watched this situation unfold and who simply nodded when I told him and said, "About time, Frank." We received 2 offers. I accepted the second one, which came from a family, a couple with 3 young children who had been looking for a working property. The father had grown up on a farm in Indiana. When Patricia told me that detail, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. The closing was scheduled for a Friday in late April. I told Marcus on the Monday before. I asked him to sit with me on the front porch after dinner. Kelsey was inside. I told Marcus directly and without preamble that I had sold the farm, that the closing was that Friday, and that I needed him and Kelsey to have their belongings out by Thursday evening. I told him the decision was final, and had been for some time. I told him that I was not angry at him, which was true. I told him that I loved him, which was also true. Marcus stared at me for a long time. "You can't do this," he said. "I can," I said. "It is my property. It was always my property. We have been living here for over a year." "Yes," I said. "You have, without a lease, without an agreement, without contributing to the taxes or the insurance or the upkeep, and in that time, Kelsey has removed your mother's curtains, discarded your mother's photograph from the mantelpiece, and has made clear on multiple occasions that she considers this property to be hers." Marcus opened his mouth. "I am not saying this to attack your wife," I said. "I am saying it because I need you to understand that what has happened here is not simply a family adjustment. The things that were removed from this house were not decorations. They were what is left of your mother, and I will not have them treated as clutter in the house that your grandfather built." Marcus was quiet for a long time. I could see him working through it, the way he had always done since he was small, processing slowly, needing time to find where he stood. "Where will you go?" he finally asked. "I have a plan," I said. And I did. I want to tell you about the plan because it matters to how this story ends. 3 months earlier, before I listed the farm, I had driven up to spend a weekend with my college roommate, a man named Gerald who lives in a small lakeside town in northern Michigan. Gerald and I have been friends for 42 years. His wife passed away 2 years before Dorothy, and we have been, in the years since, each other's primary company through the particular loneliness of outliving your marriage. Gerald had mentioned more than once that there was a small house for sale 2 streets over from his place, a 2-bedroom craftsman on a quiet road with a good porch and a view of the lake from the upstairs window. I bought it in February, 6 weeks before I listed the farm. I want to say that out loud because I want you to understand that I was not acting out of pain or impulse. I was not simply escaping. I was building. I had looked at the second half of my life and decided deliberately what I wanted it to contain. Gerald, the lake, a porch, room to breathe, a kitchen where every surface would hold only what I chose to place there. I had already moved the ceramic animals, Dorothy's photograph, and everything else that mattered to me to the Michigan house before the conversation with Marcus. The closing on the farm happened on a Friday as scheduled. I shook hands with the new owners in Patricia's office. The father had brought his oldest son, a boy of about 10, who sat in the chair beside him the whole time with his feet not quite touching the floor. I looked at that boy and thought about Marcus sitting beside me at a closing in 1996 when my father signed the deed over to me. That boy didn't know yet what he had. I hoped he would figure it out. I had a cashier's check in my jacket pocket. The sale of the farm covered several things I had decided in advance. A portion went into a trust I set up for Marcus, structured so that he would receive distributions over time rather than a lump sum. That was not punitive. That was practical. I wanted the money to benefit him, not to evaporate. Patricia had helped me structure it carefully. Another portion went to a local land trust that works to preserve small family farms in our county. It seemed right. The remainder came to me, and it was more than enough. I drove away from the closing and did not stop in Millbrook. I had said my goodbyes to Dale the week before, standing in his driveway with the late April light going sideways through the maple trees. Dale had gripped my hand and said, "She'd be proud of you, you know." I did not trust myself to answer that, so I just nodded. I drove 6 hours north to Michigan. Gerald was waiting on his porch when I pulled up. He had 2 mugs of coffee on the railing, and he raised one when he saw my truck and said nothing, which was exactly right. I sat on my own porch that first evening and looked at the edge of the lake visible through the pine trees at the end of the road, and I thought about Dorothy. Not with the weight I had been carrying for 3 years, but with something lighter. Gratitude, maybe? She had given me 32 years of a life I had not earned alone. She had planted a garden and laughed at estate sales, and known every neighbor by name, and raised a son, and made curtains out of fabric she found at a fair, and placed a chipped ceramic rabbit on a windowsill because her 7-year-old boy had given it to her, and it was the best thing she owned. She had loved that farm, but she had not been the farm. She had been something I carried. Marcus called me 3 weeks after the closing. It was a Sunday evening, same as always. He was quiet at first, and then he said, "I've been thinking a lot." I told him I was glad to hear it. He said that he and Kelsey had found an apartment in Columbus, that they were figuring things out, that it was hard but that they were managing. He said it carefully, and I understood what was in the spaces between the words. I asked him how he was. He said he didn't fully understand what I had done yet. He said he wasn't sure he agreed with it. I told him he didn't have to agree with it. I told him that I loved him and that the trust was in his name, and that Patricia had sent him the paperwork. I told him that his mother's chipped ceramic rabbit was on the windowsill in my kitchen in Michigan, and that if he ever wanted to come and see it, there was a room for him. He was quiet for a while. She would have done the same thing, he said finally. Wouldn't she? It was not quite a question. She would have done it faster, I said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. I sat on my porch after we hung up, and the lake was dark, and Gerald had his light on across the way, and the Michigan air smelled like pine and cold water, and something I kept almost recognizing as the beginning of something, Not the end. I am 64 years old. I have gray at my temples and lines around my eyes. My wife is gone, and I miss her every single day without exception, and I am not done. If you are somewhere tonight holding something that belongs to you, a place, a memory, a life you built with someone you loved, and someone around you has started calling it theirs, I want you to hear this. Your history is not a burden on other people's future. What you built has value that cannot be appraised. You have the right to protect it. And if you need to make a quiet decision and drive 6 hours north to a lake and a porch and a friend with 2 cups of coffee waiting, then that is not retreat. That is knowing, finally and completely, what you are worth. If this story reached something in you today, I hope you will stay with us here at Eclipse Vengeance. There are more stories here of people who were underestimated, overlooked, and written off, who found their footing and did not look back. Hit like if you think Dorothy's curtains deserved better. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. And if you are new here, welcome. You are exactly where you are supposed to be.